Shoulder planes. Are they any different setting up a standard hand plane? Yes, they are. Well, kind of actually. This video will give you some pointers of things to look out for when setting these up and get you those beautiful shavings coming out of the mouth on this thing. Let's go. So the application in which I most use a shoulder plane is when trimming tenons. So that's how we're going to set this up today. We're going to be focusing on trimming the shoulders on these back and also the cheeks of the tenons, say if we were going to try and fit them into a mortise. So let's get you in close and look at what we got going on here. So before starting anything, I just want to say that if you want to know why I'm using the Veritas shoulder plane rather than the Lie-Nielsen one, be sure to watch my tool duel video I did previously. The link is up here somewhere and that'll take you to it, and I'm comparing the two shoulder planes and you can see what I like about this one. So before we go all willy-nilly setting up the shoulder plane to take that cut, let me tell you one thing that you really should know about shoulder planes, and that is with the lever cap on them. These lever caps hold the blade down by loosening this thumb wheel here, they pivot here and it provides pressure on the end here. So it's kind of like a seesaw action on it almost. But what happens is when I tighten this up, can you see how little material there is in the frog here that supports the blade from underneath? There's really not a lot there. There's nothing on the side because obviously these blades need to be able to get right into corners. You're literally just supporting it from underneath. So if I tighten this too much, you can imagine that it's going to be very minuscule, but that frog is going to start bending down like that, and then it's going to put the sole of this plane out of flat. And I can demonstrate that to you now. Oh look, a sharpening plate has appeared, how convenient. So this is just 400 grit sandpaper stuck to some float glass, and I'm going to show you how this can throw the sole out of flat if you over tighten that cap iron. So what I'm going to do, simply scribble all over this with pencil, so right from the toe of it, all the way around the mouth, all the way over this frog, all the way to the heel on it. So absolutely cover that thing so we can see the entire surface of it. So there we go. That is all covered in pencil now. What I'm going to do is get this cap iron and start over tightening that. I'm not going to do it too much, so I'm really wrenching it around, just enough to class it as over tightened. So now, on the 400 grit plate, you're going to cringe at this, but watch. I'll just drag this back, maybe 2 or 3 times. Let's change the pressure as well. There we go, and flip this over. Look at what we're looking at here. And exactly as expected, you see we started removing the pencil marks on the very end here, and there's no pencil marks on the heel of it here. But look, around there, absolutely nothing around that frog. You can see where they've started fading off, and that is where the frog has been pushed down by over tightening the lever cap on this thing. So when you are tightening up that cap iron, just be aware of that happening. Thank you for that float glass. Instead, just focus on having enough pressure on this to keep the blade in place, but not so tight that you're going to start distorting the sole of one of these things. Providing you've taken the backlash out of the thrust wheel here and snugged this down a little bit, that blade should not go anywhere, despite only having a tiny bit of pressure on the lever cap here. So now let's look into getting this thing set up so it's actually ready to cut something. So firstly, the blade. You need to get this as square as possible. If this is slightly skewed, you're going to have massive trouble keeping this parallel to the sole of the plane. Now this is where something like the Veritas honing guide would come in great handy for this, because you've got a wide roller for it and it's going to keep that perfectly square to the stone. If you're using an eclipse style guide, it's going to take a little bit more skill to do so. If you want to know more of the differences between those honing guides, be sure to watch my tool duel I did where I compared the Lie-Nielsen and the Veritas honing guides and which one will suit your needs the best. So like I say, this is ground perfectly square, and what I'm going to do is carefully put that in the plane like that, so it goes in sideways, twist it round, and then on the back here on the Norris style adjuster there's a little nubbin thing that locates on the blade and keeps it in place. So that's in there now. Pop the cap iron in and then tighten that down. So that's where I can feel the thread starting to engage in the blade, and now I'm literally just going to turn it like that, and that is going to keep it all in place. Now the next thing to note here is that the blade is not the same width as the body on this plane. It actually sticks out about maybe 1/4 to 1/2 millimetre either side. And this is to allow you room to skew that blade from side to side. So you can imagine if you've only got at most 1/2 millimetre either side, you need to get that blade ground really square to start with. Now because it's not flush, the other thing to note here is if you're using this thing on its side or you're going to be using it up against the wall of something, you need to make sure that the blade is not sticking out on the side that you want to keep clean. So for example, if I'm going to be trimming this saw cut back to the shoulder line, I'm going to be wanting to use the plane like that. If the blade is sticking out underneath, I'm just going to start messing up all of this corner here and it's going to be difficult to use. So to get it flush, all we've got to do is put it down on a known flat surface, loosen the cap iron a little bit, and then just press down all over the body of it and also on the sides of the blade to make it located on there. Tighten that down, not too much. There you go, I can feel that's poking up an even amount on the bottom of there. So now that blade is flush with the right hand side of the plane, and now if I'm to use it on here and start pushing it through, it's going to keep that nice and square and get right into the corner of there. So it's going to eliminate any cleanup I need to do afterwards, which is always nice. Now this is another reason to get this blade perfectly square, because obviously if you flush it with the side of that edge and it's out of square, by the time you adjust that so it is square, it's probably going to be sticking out the wrong side again. So really focus your attention on that when you're sharpening these shoulder planes. So because that's all flush now, I can start bringing the blade out. So I'm turning that clockwise. And what I'm going to do is get my shooting board. So that's hooked over the edge of the bench. And I like to trim tenon shoulders on their side like this so I can see myself working back to that shoulder line. So I'm just going to put it on here. I'm going to rotate my little handle upwards. And I'm just going to start pushing it through. So no cut there. Still no cut. There you go, right, it's starting to grab now. It's taken off the high point, so I'm going to turn it a little bit more. There we go, I'm just going to keep pushing that through. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not going all the way through off this back line here, because that's just going to blow out the other end. Instead, I'm just going to work it in sort of like a V shape. So I'm going to work in from both sides and make sure I don't hit the opposite end. So there we go, I'm pretty much down to my shoulder line on this side now. So what I'm going to do is flip it over and work on this side now. But obviously, this side of the blade is now sticking out from it. So I'm going to need to put it down on the flat surface again. Loosen the cap iron, tighten it back down again so it's flush with there. And then I'm just going to bring the blade up and reset that cut again. There we go, that is trimming it back. This will take that last of that pyramid out of it. So if we look at the result of that, it's left a perfectly square shoulder on there, all nice and flat on there. If that was pressed up against the edge of a mortise, that would be a completely invisible joint on that. So if you were moving on to the cheeks, again, if you wanted to get into that corner, you've just got to make sure that this edge is flush again. So loosen the lever cap, press it down on the flat surface, snug it down a bit, right into that corner. There we go, so that side's down. Now I'm just going to flip it over. Again, just reset where this is 0,2. So it can be a little bit of a laborious process having to switch between these all the time and having to flush the blade with one edge, especially if you're going to be flipping between orientations like I'm doing now. But the price you pay in terms of time now is time that you've saved not having to chisel out that corner there. So I can just get right up into it again. There you go, start taking that out. The only thing I'd recommend to do from here is just adjusting the mouth. I've already done this from when I set it up previously. You want it to be as fine as possible, unless you're obviously removing a load of material where you want it to increase the depth of a rebate, for example. You change the mouth by simply undoing this one on top, and then loosening this one on the end allows you to move that mouth in and out. You can also take that off completely and use this as a chisel plane to some extent, providing this front section is able to overhang the component that you're chiseling into. So there we go, that is how you set up a shoulder plane. Not really that difficult, just make sure that you are not over tightening that cap iron when you do it, because no matter how good your plane is, this is a Veritas one, it's still throwing that sole out of flat. Like I said before, if you want to know why I'm using this Veritas one, watch my tool duel I did previously with this versus the Lie-Nielsen. And if you want to know how I sharpen this blade to take end grain off so easily with this, be sure to watch my video on how to sharpen a plane blade. So hopefully that has enlightened you on the topic of setting one of these things up. See you next time.